When the homeless veteran stood before Judge Hamilton, facing 3 criminal charges, neither man realized they had met before on a battlefield 8,000 miles away. What happened next when the judge recognized the faded Army Ranger's tattoo, silenced the entire courtroom, and changed everything without a single word being spoken? Marcus Thompson hadn't expected anyone to look past the torn jacket and weathered face when he shuffled into Phoenix Municipal Court that Tuesday morning, still carrying the invisible weight of the 23 soldiers he'd pulled from that burning Humvee in Kandahar. The shackles around Marcus Thompson's wrists clinked softly as he was led into courtroom 3B of the Phoenix Municipal Court. At 67, his weathered face told stories that no one in this sterile room would ever bother to read. His grey beard was unkempt, his clothes carried the musty smell of too many nights spent in doorways, and his brown eyes held the distant look of a man who had seen too much and been forgotten by too many. "Case number 2024 CR 8847, announced the bailiff, his voice echoing off the pale green walls. "State of Arizona versus Marcus Allen Thompson." Judge Robert Hamilton looked up from his paperwork, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. At 58, Hamilton had presided over thousands of cases, but something about the defendant's military bearing, even in shackles, caught his attention. The man stood straighter than most, shoulders back despite his circumstances. "Mr. Thompson," Hamilton began, consulting his file, "you're charged with criminal trespass, disturbing the peace, and resisting arrest. How do you plead?" Marcus lifted his chin slightly. Even homeless, even broken, 25 years of military service had ingrained certain habits. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The prosecutor, a sharp-dressed woman in her 30s named Janet Pierce, stood up. "Your Honor, the defendant was found sleeping behind Miller's Bakery on East McDowell Road at 2:30 a.m. When Officer Rodriguez asked him to move along, Mr. Thompson became belligerent and refused to comply. It took 3 officers to subdue him." Marcus's jaw tightened. Belligerent. The word stung because it wasn't true, but he'd learned that the truth was often the first casualty, when you had no address and no one to vouch for your character. "Where's your attorney, Mr. Thompson?" Judge Hamilton asked. "Don't have one, sir. The public defender, they couldn't make it today." Hamilton frowned. In his 2 decades on the bench, he'd seen too many cases where defendants went unrepresented. But something about this particular man bothered him, not in a negative way, but in a way he couldn't quite place. "We'll need to postpone." "Your Honor," a clear voice interrupted from the back of the courtroom. "Sarah Mitchell, attorney at law. I'll be representing Mr. Thompson." All heads turned. A woman in her early 40s with prematurely grey hair and confident stride walked down the aisle carrying a leather briefcase. She wore a simple but professional navy suit, and when she smiled at Marcus there was recognition in her eyes, not of him personally, but of what he represented. "Ms. Mitchell," Hamilton said, consulting his records, "I don't see you listed as counsel of record. Pro bono appointment, Your Honor, just filed this morning." She handed papers to the bailiff. "I specialize in veterans' cases." Marcus turned to look at this stranger, who had appeared like an answer to a prayer he'd been too proud to say. For the first time in months, something other than resignation flickered in his eyes. Judge Hamilton studied the paperwork, then looked back at Marcus Thompson. There was something familiar about the name, something that nagged at the edges of his memory like a half-remembered dream. The name Marcus Thompson echoed in Judge Hamilton's mind as he watched the defendant confer quietly with his new attorney. But it was the way the man carried himself, the rigid posture even in defeat, the way his eyes swept the room with tactical awareness, that stirred something deeper than professional curiosity. 20 years ago, Marcus Thompson had been Sergeant First Class Thompson, 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. He'd led men through some of the darkest valleys Afghanistan had to offer, earned the respect of soldiers half his age, and carried the weight of decisions that meant life or death for his brothers in arms. The faded tattoo on his right forearm, barely visible through the sleeve of his torn jacket, bore the Ranger's motto, "Rangers lead the way." Now he led no one, now he was led. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It never does. First came the nightmares that made sleep impossible, then the hypervigilance that made civilian life feel like walking through a minefield. His wife Linda had tried to understand, had held him through the worst nights, had driven him to VA appointments that led to nothing but more appointments. But when the drinking started, when he began disappearing for days at a time, when he couldn't explain why crowded places made him want to fight or flee, she'd finally had enough. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. The eviction notice came that Friday. By Christmas, Marcus Thompson was sleeping in his truck in the parking lot of a Walmart, wondering how a man who'd once been trusted with million-dollar equipment and the lives of elite soldiers couldn't be trusted with a minimum-wage job stocking shelves. Phoenix had been as good a place as any to disappear. The weather was survivable, the veteran population large enough that one more broken soldier wouldn't stand out. He'd found Miller's Bakery 3 months ago, when the owner, Mrs. Chen, had quietly left day-old pastries in the dumpster instead of throwing them away properly. She never said anything to him directly, but she always made sure the bag was tied loose and placed where he could reach it. Last night had been different. A cold front had moved through Arizona, not freezing but cold enough to make sleeping rough dangerous for a man his age. He'd only wanted to get out of the wind, had positioned himself behind the bakery where he wouldn't be visible from the street. But Officer Rodriguez was thorough, and Marcus had been too tired, too proud, and too tired of being proud to simply move along when asked. Belligerent, the report had said. The truth was simpler. He'd asked if he could just finish the night there, had explained he'd move on at dawn, had even offered to sweep the alley clean before he left. When Rodriguez had insisted he move immediately, Marcus had stood his ground for the first time in months. Not because he wanted to fight, but because sometimes a man has to make a stand somewhere, even if it's behind a bakery at 2:30 in the morning. Your Honor, Sarah Mitchell was saying, I'd like to request a brief recess to confer with my client. Hamilton nodded absently. 15 minutes. As the courtroom cleared, Hamilton remained at his bench, staring at the name on the file before him. Marcus Thompson. Where had he heard that name before? And why did it feel like something important, something he should remember? Judge Hamilton retreated to his chambers during the recess, but found no peace in the quiet space lined with law books and family photos. His eyes kept drifting to one particular frame on his desk, his son David in army dress blues, taken just before his deployment to Afghanistan in 2010. The young man's smile was confident, eager, ready to serve his country with the same sense of duty that had driven Hamilton to the bench. David Hamilton had been 22 when he shipped out, a newly minted second lieutenant, with dreams of making a difference. His letters home had been full of purpose and pride, descriptions of the landscape, the people, the mission. But by his second tour, the tone had changed. The letters spoke of losses, of friends who wouldn't be coming home, of moments when survival trumped everything else. One letter stood out in Hamilton's memory, written in David's careful handwriting on stationery that bore the stains of desert dust. Dad, something happened yesterday that I need to tell you about. We got hit by an IED while on patrol. Our Humvee caught fire and we were trapped. I thought that was it for all of us. But this ranger sergeant, guy named Thompson, he pulled 23 of us out of that burning wreck. Went back in 3 times, even when the fuel tank was about to blow. I was the last one out, and I swear I could see my whole life flash by when he grabbed me. This Sergeant Thompson, he didn't even know us, but he risked everything to save us. I owe him my life, Dad. We all do. Hamilton's hands trembled slightly as he pulled open his desk drawer, where he kept David's letters in a wooden box lined with felt. The letter was there, exactly as he remembered it, dated March 15th, 2011. His finger traced his son's words. Sergeant Thompson, he risked everything to save us. Marcus Thompson, Army, Afghanistan. The pieces clicked together with the force of revelation. Hamilton's breath caught in his throat as he reread the letter, then pulled out another one dated 2 weeks later. Dad, I found out more about Sergeant Thompson. Marcus Thompson, 2nd Battalion, 75th Rangers. Guy's a legend around here. Been doing this for over 20 years. Has more commendations than anyone I've met. But he's different from the other lifers. Quiet, looks out for everyone, doesn't talk about his medals. The guys call him the Guardian because he always brings everyone home. I hope I can be half the soldier he is. Judge Hamilton set the letter down with shaking hands. The homeless man in his courtroom, the veteran facing trumped-up charges for trying to stay warm, this was the man who had saved his son's life. This was the Guardian David had written about with such admiration and respect. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Your Honor? Tom Valdez, the court security officer, stuck his head through the door. They're ready to reconvene. Hamilton looked up at Tom, himself a Marine veteran who'd served 2 tours in Iraq, and saw something in the older man's weathered face. "Tom, did you get a look at the defendant? Thompson?" Tom nodded slowly. "Yeah, Judge. Recognized him from the veterans' shelter downtown. Good man from what I've seen. Quiet, respectful, helps the younger vets when they come in lost and angry. Never figured him for trouble. What do you know about his service record?" "Army Rangers, I heard, special operations. The kind of soldier other soldiers look up to." Tom paused. "Why?" Hamilton didn't answer immediately. How could he explain that the broken man in his courtroom was the reason his son had lived long enough to write those letters, long enough to serve with honor, long enough to die a hero's death 2 years later in another attack that no guardian could prevent? When court reconvened, Judge Hamilton found it impossible to focus on the procedural matters at hand. Every time he looked at Marcus Thompson, he saw his son's words. "Sergeant Thompson, he risked everything to save us." The homeless man before him wasn't just another defendant. He was the reason David had come home from that first deployment, the reason Hamilton had gotten 2 more precious years with his son. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Janet Pierce was saying, "the state maintains that Mr. Thompson's actions constitute a clear violation of municipal ordinances. The business owner has repeatedly complained about vagrancy in the area." But Hamilton was studying Marcus's face, looking for the hero his son had described. The man was older now, worn down by circumstances, but there was still something in his bearing that spoke of command, of responsibility accepted and carried. "Mr. Thompson," Hamilton interrupted, "you mentioned you're a veteran. What branch of service?" Sarah Mitchell looked surprised by the question, but Marcus straightened perceptibly. "Army, Your Honor. 25 years active duty." "What unit?" "2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, Your Honor." Pride crept into Marcus's voice despite everything. Some things couldn't be taken away, not by homelessness, not by addiction, not by a system that had forgotten him. Hamilton's heart pounded. The 75th Rangers. David's letters had been specific about the unit. "When did you serve in Afghanistan, Mr. Thompson?" "Multiple deployments, Your Honor, 2003 to 2012. "Were you there in March 2011? Marcus tilted his head, confused by the line of questioning. "Yes, sir, that was a difficult deployment." Hamilton leaned forward. "Do you remember an incident involving a burning Humvee? An IED attack where you pulled soldiers from the wreckage?" The courtroom went quiet. Marcus's eyes widened, and for the first time since entering the courtroom, he looked directly at the judge. Really looked at him. "March 15th, 2011, Marcus said slowly. "Convoy got hit outside Kandahar. Humvee caught fire after the blast." His voice grew distant, reliving the memory. 23 soldiers trapped inside. Fuel tank was leaking. Could have blown any second. "You went back 3 times, Hamilton said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Had to," Marcus replied simply. "That's what we do. Rangers don't leave anyone behind." "One of those soldiers was my son, 2nd Lieutenant David Hamilton." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Marcus stared at the judge, recognition dawning in his eyes. The courtroom was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. "David Hamilton," Marcus repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Young lieutenant, good soldier. Marcus's composure cracked slightly. "He wrote letters home, talked about his father, the judge, said you taught him about justice, about doing what's right." Hamilton couldn't speak. In his mind, he could hear David's voice reading those letters aloud during his brief leave before his final deployment. "Dad, you'd be proud of Lieutenant Hamilton. He's got your sense of fairness, your integrity." "Your Honor," Sarah Mitchell said gently, "perhaps we should take another recess." But Hamilton shook his head. "Mr. Thompson, do you remember pulling my son from that Humvee?" "He was the last one out," Marcus said, tears now visible in his eyes. "Kid was unconscious, badly hurt. I thought we might lose him, but he was breathing when the medics took him." "He lived because of you," Hamilton said. "He came home because of you. He served 2 more years with honor because of you." The judge's use of past tense wasn't lost on Marcus. "He didn't make it home from the 2nd tour." Hamilton shook his head, unable to speak the words. The silence in the courtroom stretched until it became unbearable. Judge Hamilton struggled to maintain his composure, as memories of David flooded back. Not just the letters from Afghanistan, but the phone calls, the leave visits, the pride in his son's voice when he spoke about serving alongside heroes like Sergeant Thompson. Sarah Mitchell cleared her throat gently. "Your Honor, I believe this revelation calls for a brief recess to allow all parties to process this information." Hamilton nodded, his judicial training finally overriding his emotional response. "Court will recess for 30 minutes. His gavel fell with unusual softness. As the courtroom began to empty, Sarah Mitchell approached Marcus, who remained seated at the defendant's table, staring at his shackled hands. The weight of learning about David Hamilton's fate had settled over him like a familiar darkness. "Mr. Thompson," Sarah said quietly, settling into the chair beside him. "I need you to know that Judge Hamilton contacted me yesterday. He asked me to represent you." Marcus looked up, confusion replacing grief. "He what?" "He didn't tell me why at the time. Just said there was a veteran who needed help and that money was no object. He said he'd handle my fees personally." Sarah opened her briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. "But I think I understand now. He recognized your name before today's hearing, didn't he?" "I don't understand any of this," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. "Why would a judge want to help me? I'm nobody." Sarah Mitchell had seen this too many times. Veterans who'd internalized society's indifference, who'd begun to believe they truly were invisible. At 43, she'd dedicated her practice to proving them wrong. Her own father had come home from Vietnam to a country that treated him like a pariah. She'd watched him struggle with demons that had no name back then, seen him fight for benefits and respect that should have been automatic. "Mr. Thompson, let me tell you what I see when I look at your record." She opened the folder, revealing documents she'd spent the previous evening gathering. Bronze Star with V device for Valor, Purple Heart, Combat Infantryman's Badge, Ranger Tab, Master Parachutist Badge, 25 years of exemplary service, including 8 combat deployments. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. That was a long time ago. "The man who earned these medals doesn't just disappear," Sarah continued. "Tell me what happened after you came home." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus told his story. The nightmares that made sleep impossible. The hypervigilance that made him jump at car backfires and scan exits in every room. The drinking that started as self-medication and became self-destruction. The VA appointments that led to more appointments, but never to real help. The jobs he couldn't keep because crowds made him panic and authority figures triggered his fight-or-flight response. "Linda tried," he said, speaking of his ex-wife for the first time in months. "She tried so hard, but I wasn't the man she married anymore. I was broken, and I didn't know how to fix myself." Sarah nodded. She'd heard variations of this story countless times. "What about your benefits? The VA should have provided disability compensation, health care, housing assistance." Marcus's laugh was bitter. "They said my discharge was honorable, but that my PTSD wasn't service-connected. Too much time between deployment and diagnosis. Said the drinking disqualified me from certain programs. Everything became a fight, and I was too tired to keep fighting." "That's changing," Sarah said firmly. "The rules are different now. The understanding is different. And you have something most of my clients don't have." "What's that?" "A federal judge who owes you his son's life and is determined to make this right." Through the courtroom windows, they could see Judge Hamilton in the hallway, speaking quietly with Tom Valdez. The older security guard was nodding, his expression serious. "Mr. Thompson," Sarah said, "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Marcus looked at this woman who'd appeared in his life like an answer to a prayer he'd been too broken to say. For the first time in years, someone was fighting for him, instead of against him. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I can do that." Tom Rodriguez had worked as court security for 15 years, but he had never witnessed a scene quite like this. The Marine veteran, who normally maintained a rigid professional posture, was clearly moved as he watched Marcus Thompson in the defendant's chair. During the previous recess, he had whispered something to the court clerk that made the man's eyes widen in surprise. "Your Honor," Tom requested permission to speak, his voice trembling slightly. "With all due respect, I know this man." Judge Hamilton, still processing his own revelations, nodded for Tom to continue. Sarah Mitchell watched intently, sensing that the tide was turning in her client's favor. "I saw him at the Veterans Center on McDowell Street 3 months ago," Tom continued. his military bearing evident even as he spoke. He was helping other younger veterans, teaching them about benefits, about how to deal with the ghosts. Tom swallowed hard. Sergeant Thompson wasn't asking for anything for himself, just helping others. Marcus looked up, surprised to be recognized. He vaguely remembered Tom, another tired face in a crowd of tired faces that frequented the shelter. But he had never expected anyone to speak up for him in a place like this. Sarah seized the moment. Your Honor, what we're hearing confirms what I've discovered in my preliminary investigation. Mr. Thompson wasn't committing a crime behind Miller's bakery. He was seeking basic human shelter from the elements. The temperature that night dropped to 34 degrees Fahrenheit. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. I've spoken with the bakery owner, Mrs. Eleanor Miller. She had no idea anyone was sleeping behind her building. When I informed her of the situation, she was horrified that charges were being pressed. In fact, Sarah paused dramatically. She asked me to give this to the court. Sarah handed a handwritten letter to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Hamilton. As Hamilton read, his expression softened further. Mrs. Miller writes that if she had known about Mr. Thompson's situation, she would have offered him work and a warm place to stay. She remembers her own father, who served in World War II and struggled with what we now know as PTSD. In the gallery, murmurs began to rise. Several people in military attire had quietly entered during the proceedings. One of them, a middle-aged man with silver hair and a combat veteran pin on his jacket, stood up. Your Honor, may I speak? Hamilton nodded, sensing this was no ordinary hearing anymore. I'm Colonel James Mitchell, Army Rangers, retired. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan, and I knew Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson. This man, the colonel's voice broke slightly. This man saved my nephew's life in Kandahar, and not just my nephew, 22 other American soldiers. The courtroom fell silent. Even the prosecutor, District Attorney Robert Chen, who had been reviewing his notes for what he thought would be a routine case, looked up with new interest. Marcus felt the weight of every eye in the room. The shame that had consumed him for years began to crack like ice under spring sun. These people, these strangers, they were speaking for him when he had long ago stopped speaking for himself. Tom stepped forward again. Your Honor, in the Marines we have a saying, no one left behind. Looking at Sergeant Thompson today, I think we left someone behind. Sarah watched as several more veterans in the gallery stood up one by one. The systematic discrimination she had mentioned earlier wasn't just legal jargon. It was happening right here, right now, but in reverse. These men and women were choosing to stand with one of their own. Judge Hamilton set down Mrs. Miller's letter and looked directly at Marcus. Sergeant Thompson, I think it's time we heard your story. Not just about that night behind the bakery, but about Kandahar, about what brought you here. For the first time in the hearing, Marcus Thompson straightened his shoulders and prepared to speak. The courtroom held its breath as Marcus Thompson slowly rose to his feet. His weathered hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of memories he had buried for over a decade. Sarah Mitchell nodded encouragingly, while Judge Hamilton leaned forward, his professional demeanor momentarily replaced by that of a father desperate to understand his son's final years. It was October 15th, 2011, Marcus began, his voice hoarse but steady. Our convoy was returning from a supply run to Forward Operating Base Chapman. I was riding in the lead Humvee with my squad, 12 good soldiers who trusted me to bring them home. Colonel Mitchell, still standing in the gallery, closed his eyes. He knew this story, but had never heard it from Marcus himself. The IED went off under the third vehicle, a massive explosion that lifted the Humvee clean off the ground and flipped it twice. Marcus's voice grew stronger as he continued. I remember the sound, not just the blast, but the silence that came after. That terrible silence before the screaming started. Judge Hamilton gripped his gavel, his knuckles white. His son David had been in that third Humvee. The vehicle was on fire, fuel was leaking everywhere, and we all knew it could explode at any second. My squad leader ordered us to establish a perimeter, wait for backup. Standard protocol when dealing with potential secondary devices. Marcus paused, looking directly at Judge Hamilton. But I could hear them calling for help. Soldiers trapped inside, burning alive. Your son, David Hamilton. His voice was the loudest. The judge's breath caught. Tom Rodriguez had moved closer, no longer concerned with protocol. I made the decision to disobey orders. I told my squad to cover me, and ran toward that burning Humvee. The heat was... Marcus touched his left arm unconsciously, where old burn scars were hidden beneath his worn sleeve. The heat was like nothing I'd ever experienced, but I could see movement inside. Sarah watched as the prosecutor quietly closed his file. This was no longer about trespassing charges. The first soldier I pulled out was Private Martinez. Broken ribs, severe burns, but conscious. I dragged him 50 meters away and ran back. The smoke was getting thicker, and I could barely see. The second time, I got Corporal Jackson and Specialist Williams together. Jackson was screaming about his leg. Later found out it was shattered in 3 places. Marcus's voice became barely audible. "But David, your son was trapped under twisted metal in the back. The other soldiers were easier to reach, but David was pinned. I had to make 3 more trips for the others first, and with each trip, the fire was getting worse." Judge Hamilton was no longer trying to hide his tears. "You went back for him." 7 times total, Marcus said simply. "David was the last one I pulled out. By then, the entire vehicle was engulfed. I remember dragging him away just as the fuel tank exploded. The blast knocked us both unconscious." Colonel Mitchell spoke from the gallery. 23 soldiers. You saved 23 American soldiers that day, Sergeant." "Not 22, you counted yourself short." Marcus shook his head. "I was just doing my job." "No," Judge Hamilton said, standing up from his bench. "You were being a hero, and my son David lived because of you. He lived for 2 more years because you ran into that fire 7 times. The silence in the courtroom was profound. Even the court reporter had stopped typing. 2 moved to continue. "After that day," Marcus continued, his voice breaking, "David and I stayed in touch. He wrote to me about wanting to be a lawyer like his father, about making a difference when he got home. He never made it home." Judge Hamilton stepped down from his bench, removing his robe as he did. "David died in a second attack 2 years later, but he lived long enough to fall in love, to marry his college sweetheart, to see his first child born. You gave us that, Sergeant Thompson. You gave us 2 more years with our son." The 2 men stood facing each other across the courtroom, judge and defendant, father and hero, both carrying burdens too heavy for one person to bear alone. Judge Hamilton stood frozen between his elevated bench and the courtroom floor, caught between his role as an impartial magistrate and his overwhelming gratitude as a father. The black robe in his hands felt like a costume he no longer deserved to wear, at least not in this moment, not in front of this man. "Your Honor," Sarah Mitchell said gently, recognizing the internal struggle playing out before everyone, "perhaps we should take another recess." But Hamilton shook his head. "No. This is exactly where we need to be." He looked around the courtroom, taking in the faces of the veterans who had gathered, the court staff who were openly weeping, and the prosecutor who had set aside his files entirely. Tom Rodriguez stepped forward with a folder he had been carrying. "Your Honor, I took the liberty of pulling some records during the last recess." His voice was thick with emotion. "Sergeant Thompson's military file is extraordinary." He opened the folder with reverence. Bronze Star with V device for valor, Purple Heart, Combat Infantry Badge, Army Commendation Medal with V device, Afghanistan Campaign Medal, Iraq Campaign Medal. Tom's voice grew stronger with each medal he named. And according to these documents, he was recommended for the Silver Star for the Kandahar rescue, but the paperwork was never processed due to administrative errors. Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "I never knew about any Silver Star recommendation." Colonel Mitchell spoke from the gallery. "The system failed you, Sergeant. It failed a lot of us, but that doesn't diminish what you did." Sarah seized the moment to present more evidence. "Your Honor, I've also discovered that Mr. Thompson has been denied Veterans Affairs benefits for the past 3 years due to what they termed insufficient documentation of service-connected disabilities. This despite clear evidence of PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and chronic pain from his combat injuries." Judge Hamilton felt anger rising in his chest, not at Marcus, but at a system that had so thoroughly abandoned a genuine American hero. What kind of documentation did they require? "Witness statements from his commanding officers," Sarah replied, "most of whom were killed in subsequent attacks or have since died from service-related illnesses. The VA essentially created an impossible standard for Sergeant Thompson to meet." Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a psychiatrist who specialized in veteran mental health, had quietly entered the courtroom during the testimony. She raised her hand to speak. "Your Honor, I've been treating veterans with PTSD for 15 years. What we're seeing here is unfortunately common. Combat veterans, especially those who performed extraordinary acts of heroism, often struggle the most with reintegration. They set impossibly high standards for themselves and view asking for help as a form of weakness." She looked directly at Marcus. "Sergeant Thompson, sleeping behind that bakery wasn't a crime. It was survival. You were using the same tactical awareness that kept you alive in Afghanistan to stay safe on the streets of Phoenix." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. For the first time in years, someone was explaining his actions without judgment, without pity, but with understanding. Judge Hamilton made a decision that would be talked about in legal circles for years to come. "Bailiff, please contact the District Attorney's office and inform them that I am dismissing all charges against Sergeant Thompson immediately." Prosecutor Chen stood up. "Your Honor, the people have no objection to dismissal. In fact, we would like to formally apologize to Sergeant Thompson for any additional trauma these proceedings may have caused." A murmur of approval ran through the gallery. Several more veterans had entered quietly, word having spread through the Phoenix veteran community that one of their own was finally getting the recognition he deserved. But Judge Hamilton wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I am directing the court administration to provide Sergeant Thompson with immediate access to legal aid services specializing in veterans' benefits appeals. This travesty ends today." Sarah Mitchell smiled. She had seen many victories in her career, but few felt as important as this one. Marcus Thompson, for the first time in 3 years, felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. Judge Robert Hamilton could no longer maintain the pretense of judicial objectivity. The weight of protocol, of professional distance, of the black robe that symbolized impartial justice, all of it crumbled in the face of a debt that could never be repaid. He descended the remaining steps from his bench, still clutching his judicial robe, and walked directly toward Marcus Thompson. The courtroom held its collective breath. In 30 years of legal practice, no one present had ever seen a sitting judge abandon his bench during active proceedings. Court reporter Janet Mills stopped typing altogether, unsure whether she should document what was clearly becoming a deeply personal moment. "Sergeant Thompson," Hamilton said, his voice breaking with each word, "you need to know something that I should have told you the moment I recognized your name." Marcus, still processing the dismissal of charges and the unexpected support from the community he thought had forgotten him, looked up with confusion. "David Hamilton was my son." The words hit the courtroom like a physical force. Several veterans in the gallery audibly gasped. Tom Rodriguez placed his hand over his heart in an unconscious gesture of respect. Sarah Mitchell felt tears she had been fighting finally break free. But it was Marcus's reaction that would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives. The weathered, broken man who had shuffled into the courthouse in handcuffs suddenly straightened to his full height. His eyes, which had been dulled by years of pain and neglect, blazed with recognition and emotion. "David Hamilton," Marcus whispered, his voice carrying the reverence of someone speaking the name of the dead. "Lieutenant David Hamilton, 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment." "Yes," Hamilton said, now standing directly in front of Marcus. "My boy, my son who came home from that first deployment because you ran into hell 7 times to pull him out." Marcus's hands began to shake uncontrollably. "Sir, I am so sorry for your loss. David was... he was one of the finest soldiers I ever served with. When I heard about the second attack..." "Stop," Hamilton said firmly, but not unkindly. "You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. Do you understand me, Sergeant?" The judge reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn letter, creased from years of handling. "David wrote this to his mother and me 3 days after Kandahar. He made me promise to find you when he got back, to thank you properly. But then..." Hamilton's voice failed him completely. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward from the gallery, recognizing that something sacred was happening. "But then the second attack happened," Marcus finished quietly. "IED on patrol near Kabul. I heard about it through channels. Lost 8 good Rangers that day. Including my son." Hamilton nodded. "But here's what you need to understand, Sergeant Thompson. David lived for 26 months after you saved him. In those 26 months, he married his college sweetheart, Jessica. He became a father to my granddaughter, Emma. He finished his degree in criminal justice because he wanted to follow in my footsteps. Hamilton unfolded the letter with trembling hands, and he wrote this. Dad, if anything happens to me over here, I need you to find Sergeant Marcus Thompson. He's the reason I'm alive, and he's the kind of man I hope to be someday. Rangers don't leave anyone behind, and we can't leave him behind either. The courtroom was completely silent except for the sound of muffled crying. Tom Rodriguez was no longer trying to hide his tears. Even the prosecutor, Robert Chen, had removed his glasses to wipe his eyes. Marcus felt his knees buckle slightly. The weight of survivor's guilt that had crushed him for over a decade suddenly had a counterbalance, the knowledge that his actions had meaning beyond that single day in the desert. You didn't just save David's life, Hamilton continued, his voice growing stronger. You gave him the chance to create life. My granddaughter Emma exists because you ran into that fire. She's 8 years old now, and she's going to know your name. Judge Robert Hamilton, father and grandfather, extended his hand to Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson, hero and forgotten warrior. Thank you for bringing my son home. The handshake between Judge Hamilton and Marcus Thompson seemed to break a dam of emotion that had been building in the courtroom. What started as a simple gesture of gratitude became something much more powerful, a moment of recognition that rippled through every person present. Tom Rodriguez was the first to move. The Marine veteran stepped away from his security post and walked deliberately toward Marcus. Without a word, he came to attention and rendered a crisp military salute. Semper Fi, Sergeant. Thank you for your service. Marcus, overwhelmed, returned the salute with muscle memory that transcended his current circumstances. The simple exchange of military courtesy seemed to restore something in his bearing that had been lost for years. One by one, the veterans in the gallery began to stand. Colonel Mitchell moved forward, his combat veteran pin catching the courtroom lights. Sergeant Thompson, I served in the 3rd Battalion. We heard about Kandahar throughout the entire Ranger Regiment. What you did, it became legend. A younger veteran, maybe 30 years old, approached with obvious nervousness. Sergeant Thompson, I'm Staff Sergeant Kevin Brooks, 1st Battalion, 75th Rangers. I deployed to Afghanistan in 2013. He paused, gathering courage. My squad leader was Sergeant First Class Williams, Marcus Williams. You saved his life in that Humvee. He trained me, kept me alive on 3 deployments. I'm here because you brought him home. Marcus felt his worldview shifting with each testimony. For years he had convinced himself that his service didn't matter, that he was forgotten, that his sacrifices were meaningless. Now faces and names were connecting in ways he had never imagined. Sarah Mitchell watched this organic ceremony unfold with professional amazement and personal awe. She had represented hundreds of veterans, but had never witnessed community healing happen in real time like this. Another veteran stepped forward, an older woman in an army jacket. Sergeant Thompson, I'm Master Sergeant Patricia Lopez, retired. I never served with you, but I serve with you now. She gestured to the other veterans. We all do. This is what leave no one behind really means. Judge Hamilton, still emotional from his own revelation, looked around his courtroom with new eyes. This wasn't just a legal proceeding anymore. It was a homecoming that was 13 years overdue. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the VA psychiatrist, approached the informal gathering. Sergeant Thompson, I'd like to offer you something that should have been offered years ago. Comprehensive PTSD treatment through the Specialized Combat Trauma Program. No paperwork barriers, no bureaucratic delays. You've earned that care 100 times over. Marcus felt his defensive walls, built from years of rejection and disappointment, beginning to crumble. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Colonel Mitchell replied. Just accept what you've earned. Tom Rodriguez cleared his throat. Your Honor, if I may make a suggestion? Judge Hamilton nodded, still trying to process the transformation of his courtroom into something resembling a military ceremony. The court employees have been watching this, and we'd like to do something. We want to take up a collection, help Sergeant Thompson get back on his feet. New clothes, temporary housing, whatever he needs while his benefits get sorted out. That's very generous, Tom, but Hamilton began. Already done, sir, Tom interrupted with a slight smile. We raised $800 during the recesses. Janet Mills from court reporting kicked in $50 and said, "This is the most important thing I've ever recorded." Janet Mills, the court reporter, gave a small wave from her position. "Just doing my part, Sergeant." Marcus looked around the room at all these faces, strangers who had become advocates, fellow veterans who had become brothers and sisters again, court officials who had become something approaching family. The isolation that had defined his existence for 3 years was dissolving before his eyes. Sarah Mitchell stepped close to her client. "Marcus, there's something else. I've been in contact with the VA benefits office. Your case has been expedited for review. We're talking about retroactive payments that could total over $100,000 in back benefits." For the first time since entering the courthouse, Marcus Thompson smiled. Judge Hamilton removes his robe completely and walks down from the bench, sitting beside Marcus, like a father speaking to a lost son. The formal barriers of the courtroom dissolve as raw emotion takes over. With his voice breaking, Hamilton reveals the depth of his connection to the man before him. "Marcus, I need to tell you something that will change everything you think you know about today." He pulls out a worn leather wallet and extracts a folded letter yellowed with age. "This is the last letter my son David wrote before he died in that second attack. He wrote it 3 days after you saved him in Kandahar." Marcus's eyes widen as Hamilton unfolds the letter with trembling hands. The judge's voice wavers as he reads, "Dad, I met an angel today. His name is Sergeant Marcus Thompson, and he pulled me from hell itself. If something happens to me in this war, promise me you'll find him. Take care of him like he took care of us. Heroes shouldn't die forgotten." The silence in the courtroom is deafening. Marcus stares at the letter, his weathered face cracking with emotion. David Hamilton was your son." Hamilton nods, tears streaming down his face. "He came home from that deployment different. He talked about you constantly. He said you taught him that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right when you're terrified. He credited you with teaching him how to be a man." Marcus shakes his head violently. "But I wasn't there for the second attack. I should have been there when—" "Stop." Hamilton's voice is firm but gentle. "You gave us 2 extra years with David. 2 years where he met Maria, fell in love, got married. 2 years where he became a father to little Emma. 2 years where he called me every Sunday just to say he loved me. You didn't just save his life that day. You gave our entire family a gift we can never repay." The judge continues, his voice growing stronger. "David made me promise something else. He said if I ever found you struggling, if you ever needed help, I should remember that heroes don't ask for parades. They just need to know they're not forgotten. That's why I became a judge, Marcus. That's why I started the Veteran Assistance Program in this courthouse. I was looking for you." Marcus breaks down completely, his body shaking with years of suppressed grief and guilt. "I failed him. I failed all of them. I came home and fell apart while they stayed strong." Hamilton reaches over and embraces Marcus like the son he lost. "You didn't fail anyone. You carried the weight of saving 7 lives for 12 years. You've been fighting this war alone, but you don't have to anymore." The entire courtroom watches as 2 men, bound by loss and love, find redemption in each other. Hamilton whispers, "David's watching us right now, and he's proud. He's proud of the man who saved him, and he's proud of the father who finally found a way to say thank you." Marcus looks up through his tears. "I think about him every day, all of them. I see their faces when I close my eyes." "Then let's make sure they see something worth watching," Hamilton replies. "Let's make sure David's sacrifice meant something. Let's make sure no other hero ends up forgotten on the streets." As they embrace, something shifts in the courtroom. The rigid formality gives way to something more powerful: family. Tom Rodriguez, the security guard, approaches and quietly places his hand on Marcus's shoulder. Other veterans in the gallery begin to stand one by one, creating a circle of brotherhood around the 2 men. The transformation is complete. This is no longer a courtroom dispensing justice. It's a place where healing begins. Sarah Mitchell steps forward with a folder thick with official documents, her expression mixing professional satisfaction with genuine warmth. "Your Honor, while you were discovering the truth about Sergeant Thompson, I've been working behind the scenes on something else." She opens the folder with a smile that transforms her entire face. "Marcus, your VA benefits have been approved retroactively, all of them. Every single benefit you were denied over the past 3 years." The courtroom erupts in whispers and murmurs of amazement. Marcus stares at the documents in disbelief. That's impossible. They told me I didn't qualify. They said my discharge paperwork was insufficient." Turns out a federal judge's inquiry carries significant weight with the VA. Sarah grins. Your benefits total $186,000 in back payments, plus full medical coverage, housing assistance, and a monthly disability pension of $3,200. You'll never be homeless again, Marcus. But the surprises are just beginning. Tom Rodriguez, the security guard who had been quietly observing everything, wipes his eyes and approaches the bench. His voice cracks slightly as he speaks. Your Honor, I took the liberty of talking to the courthouse staff during the recess. We've been passing around a collection jar for the past hour. Tom pulls out an envelope thick with bills and coins. It's $3,147. Not much in the grand scheme of things, but every employee in this building contributed something. The janitor gave $20. Judge Patterson from Family Court gave $200. Even the parking meter lady chipped in $50. A distinguished man in his 50s stands up from the gallery, wearing a crisp business suit and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command. Sergeant Thompson, I'm Colonel James Wright, retired Army. You saved my nephew, Private First Class Danny Martinez, in Helmand Province in 2009. Danny's alive today because you pulled his squad out of an ambush. Wright approaches the bench with purpose. I run Wright Construction now. We do commercial projects throughout Arizona. I need a project supervisor, someone who knows how to lead men and get things done under pressure. The job pays $65,000 a year, plus benefits. It's yours if you want it. Before Marcus can respond, another veteran rises from the gallery. I'm Bill Henderson, Marine Corps, Vietnam. I own 3 apartment buildings in downtown Phoenix. Unit 4B has been empty for 2 months. It's got a view of the mountains and it's close to the VA hospital. It's yours, rent-free for the first year, furnished and ready to go. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, who had been quietly observing from the back of the courtroom, approaches with a gentle smile. Marcus, I run the new PTSD treatment program at the Phoenix VA. We use cutting-edge therapy techniques. No waiting lists, no bureaucratic nonsense. I want to personally oversee your case. We start tomorrow if you're willing. Marcus looks around the room in overwhelm, his weathered hands trembling. For 3 years he had been invisible, a ghost haunting the streets of Phoenix. Now, suddenly, everyone sees him. But the old soldier's pride kicks in, ingrained by decades of military self-reliance. I can't accept charity, he stammers. I need to earn my way. I can't just take handouts. Colonel Wright's voice booms across the courtroom with military authority. This isn't charity, Sergeant. This is what we do. Rangers lead the way, and Rangers leave no one behind. That creed includes you, and it always has. Tom Rodriguez steps forward and does something that makes everyone in the courtroom freeze. He snaps to attention and renders a perfect military salute to Marcus Thompson. His voice carries across the silent room. Welcome home, brother. Welcome home. One by one, every veteran in the room follows suit. The formal courtroom becomes a sea of salutes. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard. Men and women from Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. For the first time in years, Marcus Thompson straightens his shoulders and returns their salutes with pride. The Rangers' creed echoes in the silence. Leave no one behind. 1 week later, Judge Hamilton has transformed Courtroom 6 into something unprecedented in the history of Phoenix Superior Court. American flags line the walls, and the Arizona state flag stands proudly beside the judicial bench. Representatives from Fort Huachuca have arrived with Marcus's complete military file, finally digitized and properly processed after years of bureaucratic limbo. Colonel Michael Stevens, active duty and resplendent in his dress blues, stands at attention beside a small table draped with an American flag. On the table rests an ornate wooden box containing the medals that Marcus Thompson should have received 12 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Hamilton announces, his voice carrying a gravity befitting the occasion, we are gathered today not for a trial, but for a long overdue recognition. Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson's Silver Star recommendation was submitted in 2011, following his actions in Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. Due to administrative errors and personnel changes, this recommendation was lost in bureaucratic shuffle for over a decade. Today, we correct that injustice. Marcus stands at attention, in a perfectly pressed dress uniform provided by the local American Legion post. The uniform fits him as if it were tailored yesterday. His military bearing has returned with remarkable speed. Tom Rodriguez, now wearing his marine dress blues for the first time in 15 years, stands ready with a borrowed bugle. The gallery is packed beyond capacity. Local news crews from 3 television stations film everything. Veterans from 4 different conflicts stand shoulder to shoulder: Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. Each uniform tells a story of service and sacrifice. In the front row sits Maria Hamilton, David's widow, clutching the hand of 7-year-old Emma. The little girl wears a small American flag pin on her dress and holds a bouquet of yellow roses, David's favorite flower. Beside them sit Judge Hamilton's elderly parents, who have driven 4 hours from Tucson to witness this moment. Colonel Stevens opens the medal box with ceremonial precision. By order of the Secretary of the Army, the Silver Star is hereby awarded to Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States while serving with Company A, 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. The colonel's voice carries across the silent courtroom as he reads the full citation. On March 15, 2011, near Kandahar, Afghanistan, Sergeant Thompson's convoy came under heavy enemy fire when an improvised explosive device disabled the lead vehicle. Without regard for his personal safety, Sergeant Thompson repeatedly entered the burning vehicle to extract wounded personnel, saving the lives of 7 soldiers who would have otherwise perished. His actions were in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army. Tom Rodriguez raises the bugle to his lips and plays taps with heartbreaking precision. The haunting melody fills the courtroom as Colonel Stevens pins the Silver Star on Marcus's chest, followed by the Purple Heart he had also never received, and a presidential unit citation for his entire company. But the most powerful moment comes when Judge Hamilton steps down from the bench, one final time. The formal robes of his office seem less important now than the truth he carries in his heart. "Sergeant Thompson," he says, his voice carrying across the completely silent room, "on behalf of my son David, on behalf of every parent who got to hold their child one more time because of your courage, and on behalf of a grateful nation that forgot to say thank you, thank you." Emma Hamilton breaks free from her mother's grasp and runs to Marcus, throwing her small arms around his waist. "Thank you for bringing my daddy home to us," she whispers. The standing ovation lasts 7 minutes, 1 minute for each life Marcus saved. Marcus Thompson, who had spent 3 years being nobody, is finally somebody again. More than that, he remembers who he always was, a hero. 8 weeks later, Sarah Mitchell sits across from Marcus in his new apartment, a spacious 2-bedroom unit on the 15th floor of a downtown Phoenix high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Camelback Mountain. The space is furnished simply but comfortably, reflecting the practical sensibilities of a man who has learned to appreciate the basics of shelter, warmth, and dignity. The coffee table between them is covered with paperwork that tells the story of bureaucratic redemption finally achieved. Bank statements show the deposit of $186,000 in retroactive VA benefits. 10 insurance cards guarantee comprehensive medical coverage. A lease agreement secures his housing for the next 5 years. Most importantly, official documents confirm his monthly disability pension of $3,247, enough to ensure he will never be homeless again. "The Phoenix VA has made you an official offer," Sarah explains, sliding a formal letter across the table. The letterhead bears the seal of the Department of Veterans Affairs, and the signature belongs to the regional director himself. Veteran Outreach Coordinator, Grade GS-12, Step 5. Your job would be finding veterans like yourself, heroes who fell through the cracks, and making sure they get the help they need before they end up on the streets. Marcus examines the job offer with wonder, reading every line twice. The salary is $52,000 annually, with full federal benefits, health insurance, and a pension plan. More importantly, the job description matches perfectly with his newfound sense of purpose. "They want to pay me to help other veterans. Judge Hamilton recommended you personally," Sarah continues. "I told the VA director that anyone who could save 7 soldiers in combat could probably save a few dozen more in civilian life. The program you'd be running has funding for the next 5 years, with potential for expansion if it proves successful." There's a confident knock at the door, and Tom Rodriguez enters without waiting for permission, a privilege earned through growing friendship. He's wearing civilian clothes now, but his posture still carries the unmistakable bearing of a Marine. In his hands he carries a thick binder labeled Phoenix Superior Court Veteran Services Program. "Marcus, I took the civilian job too," Tom announces with a grin. "Director of Veteran Services at the courthouse. Judge Hamilton created the position specifically after your case went viral on social media. My job is to identify veterans who come through the court system and connect them with resources before they become repeat offenders." Sarah pulls out her laptop and shows Marcus the social media analytics. "Speaking of going viral, your story has been viewed 7 million times across all platforms. Remember, our veterans is trending nationally. The hashtag Jura Rangers Leave No One Behind has been shared by everyone from Gold Star mothers to active duty generals. The numbers are staggering. Local news coverage led to national pickup. CNN interviewed Judge Hamilton. Fox News featured a segment on courthouse veteran programs. The Today Show wants to do a follow-up story in 6 months. Most importantly, 17 other cities have contacted Phoenix requesting help setting up similar programs. Marcus walks to his window and looks out at the city that once seemed so cold and indifferent. The streets below bustle with activity, people heading to work, children walking to school, life continuing its eternal rhythm. Somewhere down there he knows other veterans are struggling just as he was 8 weeks ago. "You know what's funny?" Marcus says quietly. "David Hamilton saved me twice. Once when I pulled him from that burning vehicle in Kandahar, and once when his father pulled me from my own wreckage right here in Phoenix." Sarah joins him at the window, following his gaze to the street below. "What's the first thing you want to do with your new life?" Marcus's answer comes without hesitation. "I want to visit David's grave. I want to tell him his old man kept his promise, and now I'm going to keep mine." 6 months after the courtroom revelation that changed his life, Marcus Thompson kneels beside a polished granite headstone in Section 23 of Phoenix National Cemetery. The inscription reads, "First Lieutenant David J. Hamilton, 1987-2013, beloved son, husband, father. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." The grave is meticulously maintained, adorned with fresh flowers that Maria and Emma Hamilton place there every Sunday, without fail. Today, however, Marcus has brought something special, something that represents both an ending and a beginning. He carefully places his newly awarded Silver Star Medal on the headstone, the ribbon bright against the dark granite. "Hey, kid," he whispers, his voice carrying the informal affection of soldiers who have shared mortal danger. "I know you can't hear me, but I wanted you to know. Your dad kept his promise. Every single word of it." Marcus pulls out David's final letter, now laminated to preserve it from his frequent readings. The words have become his daily prayer, his mission statement, his reason for getting up each morning. "You asked your father to take care of me, and he did that and more, but I think you already knew he would. You Hamilton men don't break promises." He settles more comfortably beside the grave, as if having a conversation with an old friend. "I've got 23 guys in the program now, David. 23 veterans who were living on the streets, fighting demons, feeling forgotten. Tom's got another 15 coming through the courthouse program next month." Marcus opens a folder filled with case files and photographs. Each file represents a life saved, a future restored. There's Jerry Martinez, Marine sniper who lost his leg in Fallujah. He's working construction now for Colonel Wright, making more money than he ever dreamed of. Tommy Washington, Army medic from Iraq. He's finishing nursing school on the GI Bill he never knew he qualified for. The statistics would make any commander proud. 0 suicides among program participants. 87% employment rate within 90 days of enrollment. 96% housing stability after 6 months. But to Marcus, these aren't statistics. They're brothers and sisters brought home from their own private wars. A soft voice interrupts his reverie. "Uncle Marcus?" Emma Hamilton, now 7 years old, approaches with the fearless confidence of a child who has never doubted that she is loved. She carries a small bouquet of yellow roses and wears a miniature army t-shirt that reads, "My daddy was a hero." Behind her walks Maria Hamilton, David's widow, who has aged gracefully into the role of single mother while keeping her husband's memory alive. She smiles at Marcus with genuine warmth. He has become an honorary family member, invited to birthday parties and holiday dinners. "Are you talking to Daddy?" Emma asks, settling beside Marcus with the casual ease of youth. "Mama says he can hear us when we talk to him." Marcus nods seriously, treating her question with the respect it deserves. "I was telling him about all the soldiers I'm helping now. Your daddy wanted me to take care of other veterans, and that's what I'm doing." Emma considers this with 7-year-old wisdom. Daddy saved people in the war, and you saved Daddy, and now you're saving more people. It's like a circle. That's exactly right, sweetheart. It's like a circle that never ends. Maria places her hand on Marcus's shoulder. "David would be so proud of what you've built. The program, the other cities copying your model, the lives you've saved, it's everything he hoped for when he wrote that letter to his father." As Emma places her roses beside Marcus's medal, she asks one more question. "Uncle Marcus, are you still sad?" Marcus considers carefully before answering. "Sometimes, Emma. But now when I'm sad, I do something to help another soldier. And that makes your daddy proud, and when your daddy's proud, I feel better." The circle continues. 18 months after his transformation from forgotten homeless veteran to national symbol of redemption, Marcus Thompson stands at the podium in Phoenix City Hall's main auditorium. The ornate chamber, typically reserved for mayoral addresses and city council meetings, buzzes with an energy that speaks to the magnitude of this moment. Mayor Jennifer Rodriguez, herself a Navy veteran, adjusts the microphone before addressing the packed audience. "When Judge Hamilton first told me about Sergeant Thompson's story, I thought we were simply honoring one man's military service. What I didn't realize was that we were lighting the fuse for a national movement that would transform how America treats its forgotten heroes." The statistics scrolling on the large screen behind her tell a story of systematic change that extends far beyond one man's redemption. Operation Second Chance Phoenix has successfully housed and employed 847 homeless veterans across Arizona. The Courthouse Veteran Assistance Program, now called the Hamilton Protocol, has been implemented in 127 cities across 31 states. Most remarkably, veteran suicide rates in Phoenix have decreased by 41% since the program's inception. Marcus approaches the podium wearing his best suit, the same one he wore to receive his Silver Star 8 months earlier. The Distinguished Service Medal that Governor Katie Hobbs pinned on his chest 20 minutes ago catches the television lights as he adjusts the microphone. 18 months ago I was nobody," he begins, his voice steady and clear. "I was invisible, forgotten, convinced that my best days were behind me and that my service meant nothing to a country that seemed to have moved on without me. But David Hamilton's father taught me something that changed everything. Heroes don't need glory, but they deserve dignity." The audience includes faces that have become familiar fixtures in Marcus's new life. Judge Hamilton, now fully retired and serving as National Coordinator for Courthouse Veteran Programs, sits in the front row beside his parents. Tom Rodriguez, whose marine precision has made him the most effective Veteran Services Coordinator in Arizona, gives Marcus an encouraging nod. Sarah Mitchell, who has expanded her legal practice into a full-service veteran advocacy firm employing 12 attorneys, sits with Maria and Emma Hamilton. The little girl, now 8 years old, wears her father's dog tags and holds a small American flag that she waves enthusiastically whenever Marcus looks in her direction. Colonel Wright's construction company, now employing 47 veterans across 6 states, has become a model for veteran-owned businesses nationwide. Dr. Elizabeth Warren's PTSD treatment program has achieved a 92% success rate and is being studied by the Department of Veterans Affairs for national implementation. But tonight, Marcus continues, I want to talk about the letter that started it all. He pulls out the now famous final letter from Lieutenant David Hamilton, carefully preserved in a glass frame. David Hamilton died believing that someone would remember the forgotten. Today I can tell you with absolute certainty that his faith was justified. Marcus's voice grows stronger as he addresses the television cameras broadcasting live to a national audience. This letter goes out to every veteran who's sitting alone tonight, wondering if anyone remembers your sacrifice. To everyone who's fought for this country and feels like your country has forgotten you, I want you to know someone remembers your name, someone knows what you've sacrificed, and someone is coming to find you. He looks directly into camera 1, speaking to the estimated 2-3 million viewers watching live, because that's what we do. Rangers lead the way, and Rangers leave no one behind. That creed includes you, brother. That includes you, sister. Help is coming. The ceremony concludes with Emma Hamilton presenting Marcus with a handwritten letter from her second-grade class. 23 children have drawn pictures of soldiers and written thank-you notes to veterans. Emma's drawing shows two figures, one labeled My Daddy and one labeled Uncle Marcus, holding hands under an American flag. As the crowd files out, Judge Hamilton approaches Marcus one final time. "David would be proud," he says simply. Marcus nods, looking at Emma's drawing. "He already knew, Your Honor. Heroes always know when they've started something bigger than themselves. They just don't always live to see how big it gets."